All right, good morning, boys and girls, and welcome back. I found this book online, so I'm hoping it's a little easier for you to read today. So this is chapter 19, and I want to go over some questions. These questions might appear on tomorrow's Google Classroom that I'm going to try to make. I was talking to Mr. Rittenauer today, and he was helping me to hopefully put all of your lessons in one folder with one link. So I'm going to try it. I'm learning every day. So if it doesn't work out, I'm going to keep working on it and hopefully we'll get it all in one folder on one scrolling link that will have your quizzes built into it. So we're going to try. So this is chapter 19 through 21. And so you're going to describe Sarah Ruth's father. What did Bryce do to Edward with the twine? What do you think about Bryce? And these will be multiple choice questions whenever you do take your quiz, if any of these questions appear. And then good readers always use clues that the author uses to draw their own conclusions about what the author is trying to say. So what clues from the story would tell you that Edward wished that he was a falling star? Then the question is, what happened to Sarah Ruth? And do you think Bryce's father, well, we'll just scratch that question. All right. So we're going to get started. Those are the questions that might appear on your quiz tomorrow. So I'm going to start reading. So it's chapter 19. The days passed and the sun rose and set, and rose and set again and again. Sometimes the father came home and sometimes he did not. Edward's ears became soggy and he did not care. His sweater had almost completely unraveled and it didn't bother him. He was hugged half to death and it felt good. In the evenings, at the hands of Bryce and at the ends of the twine, Edward danced and danced. Month after month passed, then 2, and then 3. Sarah Ruth got worse. In the 5th month she refused to eat, and in the 6th month she began to cough up blood. Her breathing became ragged and uncertain, as if she was trying to remember in between breaths what to do, what breathing was. "Breathe, honey." Bryce stood over her and said, "Breathe." Though Edward, from deep inside and well of her arms, "Please, please breathe." Bryce stopped leaving the house. He sat at home all day and held Sarah Ruth in his lap and rocked her back and forth and sang to her. On the bright morning of September, Sarah Ruth stopped breathing. "Oh no," said Bryce. "Oh honey, take a little breath, please." As Edward had fallen out of Sarah Ruth's arms that night before, and she had not asked for him again, so face down on the floor, arms over his head, Edward listened as Bryce wept. He listened as the father came home and shouted at Bryce, and he listened as the father wept. "You can't cry," Bryce shouted. "You got no right to cry. You never even loved her. You don't know nothing about love." "I loved her," said the father. "I loved her." "I loved her too," thought Edward. "I loved her, and now she is gone." How could this be, he wondered. How could he bear to live in a world without Sarah Ruth? The yelling between the father and son continued, and then there was a terrible moment when the father insisted that Sarah Ruth belonged to him and that she was his girl, his baby, and that he was taking her to be buried. "She ain't yours," Bryce screamed. "You can't take her. She ain't yours." But the father was bigger and stronger, and he prevailed. He wrapped Sarah Ruth in a blanket and carried her away. The small house became very quiet. Edward could hear Bryce moving around, muttering to himself, and then finally the boy picked Edward up. "Come on, Jangles," Bryce said. "We're leaving. We're going to Memphis." Chapter 20. Now remember, we're reading chapter 19 through 21 today. And so there's Edward / Jangles. How many dancing rabbits have you seen in your life? Bryce said to Edward. I can tell you how many I've seen. Only you. That's how you and me are going to make some money. I seen it in the last time I was in Memphis. Folks put on any kind of show right there on the street corner, and people pay 'em for it. I seen it. The walk to town took all night. Bryce walked without stopping, carrying Edward under one arm and talking to him the whole time. Edward tried to listen, but the terrible scarecrow feeling had come back. That feeling he had when he was hanging by his ears in the old lady's garden, the feeling that nothing mattered and that nothing would ever matter again. And not only did Edward feel hollow, he ached. Every part of his china body hurt. He ached for Sarah Ruth. He wanted her to hold him. He wanted to dance for her. And he did dance. But it was not for Sarah Ruth. Edward danced for strangers on a dirty street corner in Memphis. Bryce played his harmonica and moved Edward's strings, and Edward bowed and shuffled and swayed, and people stopped to stare and point and laugh. On the ground in front of them was Sarah Ruth's button box. The lid was open to encourage people to drop change inside. Mama, said a small child, look at the bunny. I want to touch him. She reached out his hand for Edward. No, said the mother, dirty. She pulled the child back away from Edward. Nasty, she said. A man wearing a hat stopped and stared at Edward and Bryce. It's a sin to dance, he said, and then after a long pause he says, it's a particular sin for rabbits to dance. The man took off his hat and held it over his heart. He stood and watched the boy and the rabbit for a long time. Finally, he put his hat back on his head and walked away. The shadows lengthened. The sun became an orange, dusty ball low in the sky. Bryce started to cry. Edward had saw his tears land on the pavement. But the boy did not stop playing his harmonica. He did not make Edward stop dancing. An old woman, leaning on a cane, stepped up close to them. She stared at Edward with deep, dark eyes. Pellegrina? Thought the dancing rabbit. She nodded at him. Look at me, he said to her, his arms and legs jerked. Look at me. You got your wish. I have learned how to love, and it's a terrible thing. I'm broken. My heart is broken. Help me. The old woman turned and hobbled away. Come back, thought Edward. Fix me. Bryce cried harder. He made Edward dance faster. Finally, when the sun was gone and the streets were dark, Bryce stopped playing his harmonica. I'm done now, he said. He let Edward fall to the pavement. I ain't going to cry anymore. Bryce wiped his nose and his eyes with the back of his hand. He picked up the button box and looked inside of it. We got us enough money to get something to eat, he said. Come on, Jangles. In chapter 21, Neil's Diner. The diner was called Neil's Diner. The word was written in big red neon letters that flashed on and off. Inside, it was warm and bright and smelled like fried chicken and toast and coffee. Bryce sat at the counter and put Edward's on a stool next to him. He leaned the rabbit's forehead up against the counter so that he wouldn't fall. What are you going to have, sugar? The waitress said to Bryce. Give me some pancakes, said Bryce, and some eggs. Oh, I want steak too. I want a big old steak and some toast and some coffee. The waitress leaned forward and pulled on one of Edward's ears and then pushed him backwards so that she could see his face. This your rabbit? She said to Bryce. Yes'm. He's mine now. He belonged to my sister. Bryce wiped at his nose with the back of his hand. We're in show business, me and him. Is that right? Said the waitress. She had a name tag on the front of her dress. Marlene, it said. She looked at Edward's face, and then she let go of his ear, and he fell forward so that his head rested against the counter again. Go ahead, Marlene, thought Edward. Push me around. Do with me as you will. What does it matter? I'm broken. Broken. The food came, and Bryce ate all of it without even looking up from his plate. Well, you was hungry, for sure, said Marlene as she cleaned away the plates. I reckon show business is hard work. Yes'm, said Bryce. Marlene tucked the check under the coffee cup. Bryce picked it up and looked at it, and then shook his head. I ain't got enough, he said to Edward. Ma'am, he said to Marlene when she came back and filled up his coffee, I ain't got enough. What, sugar? I ain't got enough money. She stopped pouring the coffee and looked at him. You're going to have to talk to Neil about that. Neil, it turned out, was both the owner and the cook. He was a large, red-haired, red-faced man who came out of the kitchen holding a spatula in one hand. You came in here hungry, right? He said to Bryce. Yes, sir, said Bryce, and he wiped his nose with the back of his hand. And you ordered some food and I cooked it and Marlene brought it out to you, right? I reckon, said Bryce. You reckon? Said Neil. He brought the spatula down on the countertop with a whack. Bryce jumped. Yes, sir, no, sir. I cooked it for you, said Neil. Yes, sir, said Bryce. He picked up Edward off the stool and he held them close. Everyone in the diner had stopped eating. They were all staring at the boy and the rabbit and Neil. Only Marlene looked away. You ordered it. I cooked it. Marlene served it. You ate it. Now, said Neil, I want my money. He tapped the spatula lightly on the counter. Bryce cleared his throat. You ever seen a rabbit dance? He said. How's that? Said Neil. You ever before in your life seen a rabbit dance? Bryce set Edward on the floor and started pulling the strings attached to his feet, making him do a slow shuffle. He put his harmonica on his mouth and he played a sad song and then went along with the dance. Somebody laughed. Bryce took the harmonica out of his mouth and said, he could dance some more if you want him to. He could dance to pay for what I ate. Neil stared at Bryce, and then without warning, he reached down and grabbed hold of Edward. This is what I think of dancing rabbits, said Neil. And he swung Edward by the feet, swung him so that his head hit the edge of the counter hard. Then there was a loud crack. Bryce screamed, and the world, Edward's world, went black. All right, so that was chapter 19 through 21. And if everything works out, there will be a couple of questions about your reading that will be embedded within all of the work that I'll organize for you for tomorrow. If it doesn't work out, there'll still be a little quiz for you, but it will be at its own little attachment. I hope you enjoyed chapter 19 through 21. It was very sad because of what happened to Sarah Ruth, and I look forward to reading some more to you tomorrow. Take care.